Today I want to review the book, The Three Body Problem. And unfortunately, I would not be able to pronounce the Chinese author's name, so I won't even try. But this was an amazing, amazing book. This was recommended to me by a guy that I teach with. He's a math teacher. He's a science guy. He's a math guy. He's a former NASA mathematician. Um, the guy is just unabashedly a nerd, and we talk nerd and read nerd, and we do a lot of that together. So when he recommended this book to me, I picked it up, and wow, absolutely blown away. The premise of the book is pretty interesting. It's a very unique concept. The book is about what happens when an alien uh, society, a planet, hears one of our messages and responds to it. Again, now that's not so unusual. That's not so unusual that, there are a lot of stories out there where aliens, pick us up and they come and see what's up for good, wrong, or right or wrong reasons. But this one was different because this alien culture had picked up a message of ours, and a liberal-minded alien of that society, who, for very selfish reasons, responded to this message on his own. And the response was, do not reply, do not reply, do not reply. We will come and we will overpower you. We will take your society over. We will take your planet over. Do not reply, do not reply, do not reply. The person who received that message, who found the return message, who heard the return message first, was equally as selfish, covered it up, kept that from being, heard by other people, and then on her own replied to it, please come. Humanity needs to be cleaned out. This was a great, great story, and on several levels. It was interesting at first because, when Fisher had told me about this book, when my buddy told me about this book, and he told me, yeah, this girl replies to an alien, and this the alien message, and I spent most of the book waiting for that moment. I was like, in the back of my mind, I'm like, am I reading the right book? Did I get the right book? Am I reading the right thing? It is very deep in the book when this actually occurs. And I wonder if that's kind of an Eastern literature thing where there's a lot of setup and background. That is one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book, was the fact that it was so well developed. I almost, and again, my experience with Eastern literature is very limited, but I almost suspect that, this was like a prequel, almost like book point 5 of the series, in which the entire book is the setup of the whole backstory of what happens leading up to the contact with this alien race. It was very drawn out. It was very deliberate, but it was very well explained. We get a lot of the backstory. In fact, we get backstory of the characters of the backstory. This book covers like 60 years. So we get to see generational change, and we get to see the background of the characters who led to the characters who made these decisions. So we get to see this very long, in-depth development of the characters and of the plot. Very well done. I thought that was great. One of the things that, another thing about this book that I thought was really good was just the science in it. And I'm an English guy. I enjoy history. I follow math and science. I get it. I don't teach those things. But the science in here was not overly difficult. Wasn't like you couldn't understand it. Yes, there was a discussion toward the end of the book about higher dimensions and how those unfolded and manipulated, and how those translated into what we see as our physical, our normal perception of dimension. That was a little deep, and that kind of got a little intense for me a little bit. But overall, the science was well done, was well explained. It was not too cumbersome. And my buddy, who again is a science guy, explained some of the things to me. And yes, the science is spot on. So that was great. I also liked the historical aspect of this because it is set in communist China during the Cultural Revolution and leading up into the early 21st century. And it was interesting to see that kind of perspective from, that angle that we see, or I got to see, cultural, communist China from their side, not from my outside perspective. That was really good. I did appreciate that kind of refreshing view. I like books that make me think. I like books that, kind of push me a little bit, make me wonder, make me question, ask that next question, right? Um, you know, the idea of not only what would happen if aliens contacted us, but who is going to be receiving that message, and does that change the way Earth responds? Is there one person out there that is going to speak for all of humanity? Should there be that person? Should there be some sort of kind of commonality that we should all come together and say, hey, this is how we are going to approach this? That was really, to me, one of the starting points. Like, wow, how would this work in today's society? And then again, because I'm a history guy and I enjoy history, the idea that, can science be what, biased because of government? And I know that's a common question. I know we've had that question, but that question comes up pretty regularly. But what is the connection between government and science? And obviously, government does provide a lot of funding for science, and a lot of science is done by government agencies. Would that bias the science? In this scenario, uh, the Chinese government, the communist Chinese government, wanted to make sure that their voice was being heard, that they were putting out a message that reflected their political views, their communist, social, the way they saw society. And they had this discussion of, in the book, there was a discussion of whether or not it was fair for aliens to only hear Western messages. And were those messages that were being beamed out to space only Western messages? Were they unfairly biased by Western governments? That was a really interesting point to me, and kind of made me start thinking a little bit about those things. And then, there is that question of, are all alien invasions bound to be hostile? Are they all bound to be, this kind of overtaking of us? So these were some kind of interesting questions that made me think and started making me question some things. The book was very well written, was very well, explained, and it flowed very well. And like I said, the story was very well developed, very well. You got to see a lot of evolution in the characters and the plot and the history of it. But it wasn't, overly like beating you over the head. It wasn't like drawn out and hard to follow, or kind of beating you over the head, with like minute detail. It was a really well done book. This was written originally in Chinese. This was just translated into English, which does present one problem that I had. Obviously, all the names are in traditional Chinese names. And so there was some difficulty in translating those, or trying to come up with how do those sound. I didn't know how those words would be pronounced. Names of places, names of people. They were kept in traditional names. And then they had like nicknames. So some of them had, you had like Dashi, who was this police, you know, police detective that was brought in by the government to help kind of control some of what was going on. I think, if and again, I'm going to butcher the name, but it was like Quishi was maybe his name. But they called him Dashi, which was his nickname. But there were other people that had like, their nicknames. And so that was, again, something different. It took a little bit of getting used to. I kind of got into the habit of recognizing the names instead of having the names pronounced in my head. I kind of just recognized what they looked like. Looking at which shelf to put this book on, definitely a 4. I had to put it on the 4 shelf. I really want to push it to the 5th shelf. The 5th shelf are those books that I think really move the needle, make things different, and really make people think. I think it's a book that everyone must read. This book, I think everyone should read it. I really think it's thought provoking, it's meaningful, it's deep. It is a little bit hard to get through. And I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. I think that as this kind of develops a little bit, it's going to get into a little bit more, maybe more sci-fi instead of, thought provoking. At least at this point, uh, it has a really, really deep message. And so I really want to put it like, the fourth shelf leaning toward the fifth, 4.5 maybe. But yeah, I recommend this book. I think everyone, I wouldn't recommend anyone not read this book because it was just so well done, has a great message, and was just very, very entertaining.